Okay, so here you can, in the first slide, you can see our team. There's myself, there's Tarja over there, and there's Tuomas, and we are philosophers who also work with things like physics and psychology, neuroscience, cognitive science, those kinds of things. And the let's see, the challenge, of course, well, you might ask, it connects with the Helsinki Challenge theme, New Worldview, and you might ask, well, do we need a new scientific worldview? And our answer is yes. Okay, you could ask, well, why? Now, one thing is that as we all know, the world has become increasingly complex, and also our various problems are very complex. And science and technology have actually been part of that. They're implicated. They've actually helped to make the world into a mess, if you like. Now, they could also play a part in the solution. And here, we think it helps to have a map, an overall map to coordinate our activities. Otherwise, there's a risk that science will just fragment into isolated problem solving. And in that sense, things won't work out. We've seen that with climate change. It's in some ways taken a very long time to find all the solutions that are necessary. And then we should ourselves even change our behavior. Now, the other reason is perhaps more intrinsic to science and philosophy. There are many things that are just intrinsically interesting, fundamental scientific puzzles. It may be something like the quantum theory, the atomic level, which is fascinating but difficult to understand. And then there are problems to do with mind and body. People think these days that the brain produces our conscious experience, but how exactly does it happen? That is the so-called hard problem of consciousness, which people are thinking. And we, in this very room, we will actually arranging a conference in June 9 to 13, where we will discuss some of the Viewfinder themes. Okay, so then there's the question of, well, how are we going to do about it? One thing we'll do is that we will look at the best candidates for worldview, both from physicists and philosophers, and we'll take a simplified version for discussion. But we will also pay attention to communication in that because this was already mentioned, the communication is a real problem among sciences and among various other groups of people to come together. And so our aim is to develop a dialogue method that will help in this context. Now, what about the impact? One thing we think we could get out of this is simply our capacity to deal with future crises. So we have an overall map which helps us to see a bit what's coming ahead. The other thing is to enhance interdisciplinary communication, again, to come together to solve the problems, and finally, to facilitate science policy, so that policymakers could use our map when they're designing new research programs and such like things. Now, one thing to realize here is also that worldview is not merely a passive sort of model of the world. It's actually something that profoundly influences. So, for example, the Mayan calendar at the time, it was used to determine the times of rituals and tune people's actions into cosmic rhythms. So it played a fundamental role. And we could say that closer to our own age, of course, it's no longer the priests, but maybe the physicists have taken over the worldview. And here we have Bohr and Einstein, scientists who are debating the meaning of quantum theory. Now, they couldn't agree. This is very interesting, and the problem is still with us. There were issues, indeterminism, wholeness, and so on and so forth. And now these physicists are in the lab. They're not in a lab. They're sitting in an armchair doing philosophy. So perhaps this is also needed here.
Thanks, Paavo. What can we do if even people like Bohr and Einstein couldn't agree on these fundamental issues? Well, it just so happens that we are philosophers, and philosophy gives us the conceptual tools to deal with worldview, to identify the background assumptions behind our worldview. You can see some of the assumptions of this type on the screen here, but let me say something a little bit more about the very first one, the mechanistic versus holistic worldview. We can already see that contemporary physics requires us to move forward from the mechanistic worldview that perhaps is familiar from Newton's time. Einstein's work on relativity was the first step towards a more holistic point of view, but it's only with quantum mechanics that we can fully see what the holistic worldview needs. Well, what the holism amounts to is a much debated topic, but a reasonable starting point would be to adopt a type of methodological holism. This is a simple idea. It's just the idea that when we're faced with a complex system, such as quantum theory, say, we should not be looking at the behavior of the system at the level of its component parts, about the small things that constitute the system, but rather at the level of governing principles that govern the behavior of the system as a whole. So we should be looking at the big picture rather than being bogged down in detail. And this is really just the message that we want to get across with the project altogether. What we will do is elaborate and develop different versions of these guiding principles, background assumptions behind our worldview. How we will do it? We give you the Viewfinder Center. The Viewfinder Center will host all of our central activities. It will host a crowdsourced worldview wiki. It will host a database of worldview experts. This will power the worldview wiki. And it will host the transferable dialogue method, the communication that we've been talking about here. But we do need you as well. You are the worldview experts. We need your help to make this happen. So do get in touch with us to make this happen. We are on Twitter. We are on Facebook. We are the Viewfinder team. Thank you.